Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. If someone, I know that the rest of the lines are, I believe the rest of the lines are muted, so if someone wouldn't mind just typing a quick note in the chat to let me know that you can hear me okay, and that I'm loud enough, too loud, not loud enough, that'd be great. Great, thank you, Seth. Well, thank you everyone for attending this morning. I guess it could be morning or afternoon, depending on where you're dialing in from. My name is Doug Barbin. I am a director with Brightline. The topic today we're going to talk about is cloud certification and the different forms that it can take. Quick introduction of myself. I'm a director with Brightline. I've been in information security and audit related type fields for about 15 years. I started at Pricewaterhouse back when it was when there were 6 firms. And it became PwC while I was there, and then I spent the last 10 years, the next 10 years, at VeriSign, combination of a startup company, Garden, that was acquired by VeriSign. So half of that I was spent in the consulting business, developing information security programs for clients. I was a director in the practice there. I ran the entire West Coast, and then moved over to product management, where I ran product management for VeriSign's managed security services business. So in that sense, I spent over 5 years as a service provider and a frequent auditee. So I've got a unique perspective to bring to you here today in that, while I work for an audit firm now, I've been on the other side of the fence in terms of being the auditee. I've gone through SAS 70 audits. I've gone through PCI reviews. I've gone through assessments based on ISO, not true ISO certification. But that's basically my background, and I'll talk a little bit about Cloud Audit, which is a group that I'm involved with on a kind of on a volunteer basis as well. As for Brightline, we are a company that you probably haven't heard of, but we probably touch some sort of, some aspect of the cloud ecosystem that you participate in. Brightline, that word gets used a lot in law. It's defined as a component of an objective standard. It's designed to produce predictable and consistent results. So in our words, it's the threshold of compliance with an objective standard, which is good for a firm like ourselves that focuses solely on compliance and certification. Background of the company, we were actually started in 2002 as our firm name then was SAS 70 Solutions. We were the first CPA firm to focus solely on SAS 70 audits, and those are service provider audits. We'll touch on that as well in here. Over the years, we've expanded our offerings to include PCI and now ISO certification, which I'm going to mention with some depth here as well. We conduct over 350 audits a year for approximately 300 clients. And so, these are clients that range from privately held, ASPs to large data center, Fortune 1000 companies, and so forth, many that you've heard of. We have teams of auditors that average 9 years experience. We only hire experienced auditors. Most of them come from auditors and assessors. Most of them come from either Big Four firms or from large technology firms like VeriSign, Symantec, et cetera. The kind of the key plug for the company today, and then I'll get on to the subject matter, is very excited. This morning we issued a press release announcing that we are now an ISO certification body. As we will talk to in a few minutes, when we talk to ISO certification, there are 2 different types of firms that provide services around ISO certification, or ISO 27001, or 2, as we'll discuss. One, which is a much broader group of firms, or the consulting firms that can help an organization become certified or help them align their programs with the standards. And then the other is the actual certification bodies, or the registrars themselves, and we are the latter. And you can't do both. So we do not provide consulting services. We do not provide anything that can help an organization become compliant. We are the auditor. We are the certification body, which maps well with our mission and the services that we've been performing over the years. We're fully accredited with the ANSI, the ANAB, ANAB.org. That is the U.S.-based accreditation organization, part of the government that make sure that all of the registrars and certification bodies meet their strict standards. Most major countries have a standards board like this that is basically the licensor or the overseer of the certification bodies. So we're accredited here in the U.S., but we can certify globally. ISO is an international standard. We have some clients that are already certified. We issued a press release today. You can find it on our website, where we got a quote from Mozy. Many of you are probably familiar with Mozy, online backup and related types of services. They are a division of EMC. They've been a client of ours on the SAS 70 side for many years, and so we were very excited that they were one of our first certification clients too. And there's a good amount of overlap there with the types of audits that we do. So, what we were able to do for them, we were able to be a lot more efficient in the means that we went about conducting the audit, didn't have to reinvent the wheel and relearn their environment and so forth. So regardless, we are very excited about this. This is a big step forward from us from being, when we started a SAS 70 audit-only firm. Like I said, we progressed into PCI. This is the next big step for us. And as far as I know, we're the only firm in the world that can perform a CPA form that confirm the SAS 70 audits and SSA 16 assessments, do the PCI validation, and now the ISO certification as well. So the agenda today, touch a little bit on background, and then the goal of this session is to provide you with some grounding in these different certifications and audits, how they're termed, how they're displayed, spoken to in the marketplace, and so forth. For each one of them, starting with SSA 16 and moving on through ISO certification, which we'll cover in the most depth, we want to talk about scope. I want to help you understand the outputs, what are the artifacts that are generated from companies that go through these audits, assessments, and certifications, and just some key points to remember. I'm making a personal commitment not to use any CPA speak, any technical jargon. I want to talk about this in terms of nuts and bolts from the perspective of, what does it mean for a service provider who's undergone this and is communicating this to the marketplace, and then what does it mean to the consumer, the people who are using the cloud services, so that when you see a press release from a cloud provider that says we are now ISO certified, or we are now quote unquote SAS 70 certified, which is a misnomer, and we'll talk about that as well. But just so you can understand what those mean, and then you can be armed to ask the right questions to these service providers in terms of what does that mean, or what is the scope, and so forth. So we're going to talk through each of these in a decent level of detail. And I'll touch briefly at the end in terms of integration with compliance requirements. I'm not going to go into a lot of depth in terms of the compliance requirements. You could talk about FSMA and HIPAA and a lot of the different regulatory requirements in their own separate presentations. I want to just speak to the key differences between these audits and those regulations and how they interact and what is kind of the common bond or the theme between them. And then at the end, we'll talk to looking forward and including some initiatives that are underway, the changing landscape, different types of groups such as Cloud Audit and the Cloud Security Alliance, and what they're trying to do to improve this whole process and to improve governance across the cloud providers. So why cloud certification? This is a basic example. If you've tried to sell a house, in the last 10 years, probably more, just to align make a comparison. You can't sell a house without air conditioning. Period. Nowadays, and we sold our house actually and moved about 3 years ago. And nowadays you cannot sell a kitchen without stainless steel. You can, but the majority of houses that are out there, are going to have the new appliances, are going to have the stainless steel, which is very popular right now, and so forth. So, what wasn't the case 10 or 15 years ago, has raised the bar in terms of, what's required and the features that the buyers are looking for. Take that up a notch. You look at a pool. I live out in California. Can I sell a house without a pool? Sure, and I did. The reality is, though, is the chances are one of my neighbors, i.e. one of my competitors or someone else that's selling a house, is going to have a pool in their backyard. So the analogy that we're just making here is that this is the same for cloud and service providers. There are barriers to entry. There are certain types of audits, assurance, and certifications that you need just to be in business or to do business with publicly traded companies or companies that process credit card data. And then there are also attributes and certifications that can help you, market yourself as better than a competitor. And that's when we'll get into ISO certification and talk to that a little bit more. But, the key message here is that like in selling a home, these qualities, these features of a cloud provider, some are barriers to entry, some are minimum levels of standards, some are market differentiators. And the other key message is like with a home, we've seen the progression. We've seen things shift over the years. Nothing might have been sufficient 5 years ago. A SAS 70 alone might have been sufficient, 3 or 4 years ago. Now you've got to deal with PCI and so forth. And even with ISO certification that largely today is used as a market differentiator, what we're seeing more and more is that some companies are requiring, at least in some of the international global firms that we deal with, they're requiring firms to have ISO certification as well. So that's the same progression that we're seeing in the marketplace today. A couple examples that you've probably seen online, in particular with ISO certification, focusing on the ones that are marketing it. Microsoft, Salesforce, Amazon Web Services, all have announced ISO certification within the last year. Mozy, which I've mentioned before, one of the ones we had the pleasure of doing the certification work for was just announced last week that they had gone through ISO certification as well. The compliance, and I've got a note in here, and we're going to touch on this when we get to the end of the presentation. Compliance with regulations, in particular regulations that come from law. I'm not necessarily talking about PCI, but HIPAA, FSMA, Sarbanes-Oxley. They're not the same as an attestation or a certification. So if somebody says they have gone through a SAS 70 audit, that does not mean that they are compliant with Sarbanes-Oxley. Or if they have gone through ISO certification, they are not compliant with HIPAA. They are distinct different things, but at the end I'm going to talk to how those audits and how those reports can help substantiate that you are in fact meeting the requirements. But again, they are two somewhat distinct different beasts. So with that, I'm going to jump into the first topic of discussion. So SSAE 16, and this is for all practical purposes the new SAS 70. I won't, because I promised not to use accounting speak, I won't even tell you what SSAE 16 or SSAE stands for. You can Google it or go to our website and look it up if you want any of the technical accounting details. But as many of you probably know, SAS 70 was the standard by which a CPA would conduct an audit of a service provider and report on the controls that the service provider had implemented and was providing related to the services that they're providing to customers. So SSAE 16 is the new and improved SAS 70, and the scope of the audit is it's an assessment of the services, and this is the key point, it's that it's relevant to the customer's controls over financial reporting. So, and you'll see this in a minute when we talk about these distinguishments between SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, which are terms that the AICPA has put out recently. SSAE 16 is an audit that occurs when a cloud provider or service provider performs a service that may impact its customer's financial position or financial statements mainly. So that could be, SAS 70 started in the online payroll world, in the world of the ADPs and so forth that had online processing of payroll. That instead of having to work with each one of their customers' auditors during the course of their financial audit, they came together and performed one audit that then that report could get shared with their hundreds, now thousands, and so forth of customers. So SSAE 16 is along the same lines. The audit, the service is needs to align with the customer's control over financial reporting. It's not an audit of the service provider's financial statements or billing or anything like that. It's an audit of the service that the service provider is providing to its customers, and that service that the customer is getting has some impact on the on their financial statements. So as I mentioned, it started with online payroll. Obviously payment applications, ACH, credit and debit transactions, different types of financial transactions that are occurring online via applications. It also applies to hosting providers, secure hosting providers who are providing hosting services for companies that manage applications that do that as well. So key point number one for SSA 16 is that it's an audit when the service is relevant to the customer's controls for financial reporting. Key point number two, it is an attestation. And I know I was trying to stay away from CPA speak, but what that means is that it is an opinion based on management's statement, assertion is the technical term, management's assertion about a system or its service. So what that means is as the CPA, this audit is an indication, it is an audit of what the service provider says they are doing. It is not an audit against a prescribed standard. There is no checklist. There is no defined criteria to meet SAS 70 or SSA 16, and that's why, as I mentioned, there is, technically if you see SSA 16 certified or SSA or SAS 70 certified, it's a misnomer. The audit, the whatever level of controls that the provider has in place is the level of controls that the CPA goes in and audits. And so those are very key points to remember, is that it's an audit of the service that's being performed. It's not an audit against a set of prescribed standards. The only other thing I'd add to that, assessments for SSA 16 like SAS 70, they're either point in time, type 1, or over a period of time. So, typically what you see is, there are type 1, audits out there. First-time auditees will often do a type 1 for a point in time, but most will move to the point, for getting a type 2, which is, again, it's looking at the organization and the controls that are in place, but it's also looking back over the course of 6 months, 9 months, a year, and testing to confirm that those controls have been applied consistently. Real quickly, I wanted to talk through some of the artifacts that are generated from an SSA 16 audit. So this is a sample from a sample report. The report has 4 to 5 sections. It starts with the independent CPA's opinion, which you're looking at here. It's not completely different from what you would see in the cover of a financial statement audit. The difference is that the subject matter is obviously altered to reflect the services that are offered and so forth. Like financial statement audits, you can have an unqualified or a qualified opinion. Unqualified is the most clean, of course, and that means that you are issuing a clean opinion without any qualification, without any exception, and so forth. And so, if first thing to look at when you're looking at one of these reports is to look at the opinion letter and see, are there any qualifications? Are there any components that should have been in there that weren't or weren't addressed, or that they found a certain number of exceptions throughout the testing period that are noted? This is not necessarily a flag. There are sometimes legitimate reasons for qualifications. In this case, I've shown you an example of an operating effectiveness qualification, which means the auditor went in and tested the controls but found that the controls were not operating consistently over the period of time. Other types of qualifications could be due to a deficiency in design. For instance, segregation of duties is one we see fairly often, where you've got one developer and the developer is the same person that pushes the code to production, so there's no separation or segregation of duties there, and so that can get called out as a design deficiency in the report. But generally the first thing to look at is the opinion letter. From there, you want to look at the control objectives, and this is really the meat of the report. What you're looking at here is an example matrix from a Type 2 report, which again is more detailed because it's over a period of time than a Type 1. But a couple things to notice here: when you're reading a report, you want to browse the report and you want to understand what the control objectives are, and that's at the top. These are the categories of controls that are included in the scope of the audit. So these, for practical purposes, you're talking about domains. You're talking about information, general computing controls such as information security, physical security, environmental controls, computer operations, backup, user management. There's a good amount of flexibility in how you coin these or how you design these. In short, these are the categories, these are the major headings under which your detailed controls are going to fall. So in this case, I've shown you an example where you've got information security, but a company that's got an extensive set of controls may want to break that out to have separate categories for application security, database security, operating system, et cetera. From there, beneath every control objective, you've got the actual individual controls and the tests of controls. So these are the controls that the company has to support that objective. And this is where you'll see variation in the reports that you read. A company could have 10 controls, they could have 50 controls, they could have 150 controls. Our role as the auditor is to go in and to test whatever controls are in fact in place. And obviously we've got to make sure that they meet that objective. But again, there are different ways that you can do that. And whether a company has 10 or 20 or 100 different controls to support that objective doesn't mean they do or don't support the objective. The purpose of this report is to provide that level of detail and provide that level of transparency so that you as the reader of the report can see, okay, all right, what was the objective they were trying to accomplish, and then what are all the controls that they've got in place to meet that. And then in the case of a Type 2 and a Type 1, you just have the controls listed, but in the case of a Type 2, you get to see the actual tests that the auditor performed to confirm that. So as you're reading this report, you're seeing what are the categories, what are the controls that the company has in place, and what are the tests that the auditor provided to confirm those controls. Moving on, related topic, SOC reports. So the AICPA has taken a challenging term or acronym soup, so to speak, and made it a little bit more complex because you had SAS 70 audits that were transitioning to SSA 16. And so what's been introduced by the AICPA to distinguish between some of the different alternatives is the concept of these SOC reports. So the Service Organization Control reports. And so you've probably seen these. You may see these on website. You may hear about them from your audit firm. But they are different designations of the types of service provider reports that a CPA can issue, basically. SOC 1 is SSA 16. Plain and simple, what we just discussed, controls related to financial reporting for the service and your customers. SOC 2 is a bit more loosely defined, but the idea is that it creates the output is a similar report that you would see in an SSA 16 or previously in a SAS 70 that includes an auditor's opinion, test of controls, descriptions, etc. The difference is that you use this report when the controls of the organization do not impact financial reporting, whether it's vanilla website hosting, something along those lines where the goal is to talk to security, availability, operations, and so forth. But your service does not actually impact the financial controls for the customer. There's a good amount of flexibility. This is based on another attestation standard, AT 101, and there's some guidance out there that says you can use different types of principles and criteria that are set forth by the AICPA in SysTrust. You can also use other types of criteria or control areas and so forth. You can map to ISO, for instance, and so forth. So this, excuse me, SOC 2 is meant to be, again, similar types of reporting in detail, excuse me, but when the controls do not impact financial reporting. SOC 3, on the other hand, is SysTrust, is what we know today as SysTrust. The result of SysTrust is a seal that you put on your website. WebTrust is also related to this as well, but WebTrust does not specifically apply usually to cloud providers and organizations. WebTrust typically has the privacy component that deals more with consumer based types of services and so forth. But regardless, SysTrust uses a defined set of principles and criteria that are prescribed by the AICPA. It's more of a prescriptive approach. The end result, though, is a seal. You don't necessarily get the full detailed report that you would get in a SOC 1 or a SOC 2 type of scenario. So those are the differences there. The last thing that I'd end on here is that there's these terms have been introduced on top of the new standards, which makes things a little bit more confusing. A lot of the guidance that's coming out about this, the standards are out. The SSA 16 that, SysTrust has been out for decades. The Attestation Standard 101, these are standards but which you can audit against today. Some of this stuff is still somewhat of a work in progress in that things like the AICPA audit guide and some of the additional working materials are in the process of being published within the current time frame or next couple months. Okay, moving on out of the CPA world and into PCI. So PCI is a different beast than the SAS 70 or SSA 16, and frankly even more so than ISO certification, and I'll explain that here next. But PCI, the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, covers any organization that handles credit card data, whether it's a processor, whether it's a merchant, or in the case of the presentation here, we're talking about cloud providers that either store, transmit, host, et cetera, credit card data. So one of the key differences about PCI validation is that it is prescriptive in nature. It is prescriptive down to the point where it has requirements for how many characters your passwords need to be. It has requirements for encryption and how you manage encryption keys. It tells you what types of credit card data can be stored, what types of credit card data can't be stored, and in what situations, and so forth. It is the most prescriptive security standard, really, that is out there and that is being used widespread today. The key thing to remember from a service provider, cloud provider perspective is that providers have to meet all of the applicable requirements. So the first keyword is all, and then the second keyword is applicable. And I've got a chart to show you to walk you through that here. But the thing to consider is that when you're looking at a cloud provider and your cloud provider says, well, we are PCI compliant, or we have been PCI validated by a QSA, a Qualified Security Assessor, you want to take that in context of the type of service that you're getting. So a standard co-location service that may provide power, space, basic network connectivity, environmental controls, and so forth. The scope of what they're responsible for PCI is going to be limited to things like physical security and access to the physical equipment, because the customer's got responsibility for all of the encryption, the logical access controls, and so forth. That's different from a SaaS provider or even a managed services provider that may have responsibility for operating system patching, may have responsibility for backup, different types of other functions. So the key thing when a provider says that they are PCI compliant or PCI validated is to make sure you can understand from reading their descriptions or ask them the question for what scope of service. A lot of the traditional data centers today that have previously lived in the co-location space where they're basically renting out space and the customers are responsible for the rest of the stack are moving into managed services, are moving into quote-unquote cloud services where they're providing another layer of service on top of that. And so when someone says they're PCI validated, you want to make sure that there's an alignment between the services that they're providing, what's been assessed by their QSA, and so forth, because there can be gaps. The outputs, and I've got an example here in a minute. The outputs are typically the attestation of compliance, which is the 4 to 5 page document that is shared with the card brands and banks and so forth. That is signed by the company, signed by the QSA, saying that the service provider meets all of the applicable requirements. The report on compliance is the detailed meat. I'll show you an example here in a minute that has all of the details on what was tested, what was found, and so forth. Generally speaking, reports on compliance are not public documents. SAS 70s or SSA 16 assessments are often shared with customers under NDA. Most do not share report on compliance because there's a lot of technical details that are required to go into there. That companies don't usually want to share for security purposes, things like network diagrams and so forth. But the attestation of compliance is often shared. Some will even provide unofficial certificates, something signed. We provide these, a certificate of completion from the QSA saying that they've met all the applicable requirements on this or that date. This is just a sample testing matrix for logging from the report on compliance. Speaks a little bit to some of the level of details. This is just an example. Some of the areas get into a bit more detail, but it looks somewhat similar to a SAS 70, but with the respect of that there is typically additional insight as to who was spoken to and the documents that we're looking at and so forth to come up with a conclusion. I mentioned scope. I can't accent this enough. This is actually from a client of ours, GSI, who's now part of Layered Tech. They do an excellent job of articulating to their customer base by PCI, for PCI, what requirements they're responsible for, what requirements the client is responsible for, what are shared and so forth. And so, this is very important as, not just for the providers, but as the users of cloud service. If you are running an ASP that you're hosting at a third-party provider and they've gone through PCI validation, you want to understand, what they're committing that they're responsible for from a controls perspective. Is it just the physical space? Is it the operating system? Is it, the configuration of the operating system? Is it the configuration of the virtual machine environments and so forth? And so, these get put into reports and compliance, but in this case, Layered Tech actually communicates out to their customers to say, this is what we're responsible for, this is what you're responsible for, and that the QSA has gone in and validated all of the components that GSI is responsible for. So, again, when it comes time when someone has said that they're PCI compliant, the question, if it's not evident in the literature they're providing for you, is, should be with which components. What services are you responsible for, and what services, have been audited? Because they may not be the same. There are many, many companies out there that provide managed services that do patch management and antivirus and configuration management, but at the same time haven't gotten that service audited by a QSA. The audit itself might have been limited to just the physical space and so forth. So that creates a gap such that if I'm auditing or assessing a client of a third-party hosting provider, I need to confirm all of the controls for that client. So, even if that third-party provider does backup or does patching and so forth, if that piece hasn't been validated by their QSA, then I've got to test that independently to make sure that that the client has got, that the user has got all of the controls that are up the stack, so to speak. Okay, so moving on to ISO certification. So ISO certification, I know many of us have been doing this for a while, and we grew up in the era of British Standard 7799, ISO 17799. This was the de facto code of practice. If you wanted to build the best security program in the world, you used ISO 17799, or the old British standard, to align your controls. And with that, it became it became kind of the unattainable certification. It became the goal that everybody worked to, but no one could really meet, or very few companies would meet back in the day. As time progressed and the standards evolved and moved into the ISO 27000 series, which includes 1 and 2, the standards became a little bit more, much more realistic. So ISO 27001, specifically, it all surrounds this central concept of the information security management system. It's the ISMS. It's the term that every registrar uses. It's the term that every consultant that helps companies prepare for this uses. It is what is certified. It's the management system. It's the program. That is what's certified by the certification or registrar like yourselves. It's a very important distinguishment to say that it's the program, it's the process, it's the system that provides information security for for the scope that it's meant to provide for. And so, point number one, it's all about the ISMS. Point number two, scope is defined by the organization. This can be, it can be an enterprise security program. If it's not an overly large company, it can be a product or a business unit. Amazon, certified specific products. They cited, EC2. S3 and so forth, that were specific products, specific business units that were certified under their ISO certification. Xerox is another company that's actually got a couple ISO certifications, but they're defined for defined business units. Xerox as an enterprise, I don't believe, is ISO 27001 certified. The same with Microsoft. If you look up Microsoft certification, it is for their hosting facility. It's for their their business hosting services that has gone through the certification. So it's the scope can be as narrow or as broad as the organization wants it to be. But I'll show you in a minute here with some examples where you find that level of detail and what's covered and so forth. The second piece, the next piece is that actually creates a lot of confusion is what about the controls? In the ISO 1779 world, we had all of these controls that went into baking the best security program, period. Those controls, the way that the standard is laid out is that those controls are listed in Appendix A. There are 133 of them, I believe, that are listed in Appendix A of the 27001 standard. The 27002 standard, which is not something that you can certify against, provides the guidance and the best practice for how you could potentially implement those controls. But the key point for ISO certification, for 27001 certification, is that the company is required to consider all of those 133 controls. They don't necessarily have to implement them. They would need a reason for not implementing them, but they can use risk-based decisioning and so forth to determine whether or not each one of those 133 controls are implemented and how they're implemented. So it's a very important concept to remember. And the statement of applicability is a document, is an artifact that the company produces as part of the certification process to say, which controls are in scope, which controls are not in scope or included, and so forth. And so, there's long been this tendency to believe that a company had to meet that entire laundry list of controls in order to be ISO 27001 certified, and that's not actually the case. They have to consider them and they have to build them in as part of the security management system, but you don't have to meet all 133 to comply. It's not like PCI in that regard. The last piece worth mentioning, deviations are okay. Exceptions occur with testing, things like that, and so forth. The key about ISO 27001, it's about the process. It's about the ISMS. It's about making sure that there's a process that if an exception is caught, that there's a quality assurance improvement process to fix it. Now, if you actually take some time to read the 27001 standard, you'll see that there's a good amount of similarity between 9000 and 9001 on the quality side. Obviously, they were written with the same sense in mind that the goal is it's about a system, it's about a program, it's about consistency, and it's about application. Looking at a couple quick outputs or artifacts here. The screenshots you're looking at here on our website, we actually maintain and are required to maintain as a registrar a certificate directory. And so a certificate directory allows you to go to the website of whoever the certification body is. And, some of them will require that you email them. Some of them have lookup tools. They're in various form, but as a registrar, if someone comes to me and requests verification that a company has been certified and that their status is active, I am required to provide it. And so what we've done is on our website built a directory that allows users to go in and look at the search by name. You can't list all the names of all of our clients and so forth. We don't we prevent that from happening. But if you know the name of the company that you're looking for, you can type it in, pull up their details, which you see here. And we posted up there an example, Acme. So if you go to our website and look up on Acme, you'll be able to see what you've got here is the name, which standard is covered, the certificate number, scope of registration. I'd call your attention to that. And so this is an example statement of how a company would describe its scope of registration. And here's where you would coin whether or not it's a business unit or a product line, something along those lines. As you can see, it also references the statement of applicability, as we mentioned before. So that details the, again, the selection of the 133 controls that are included in Appendix A. The other components that are listed within there are the facilities that were actually audited as part of the certification. So again, the scope is defined by the organization. It can be as wide or as narrow as as the organization wants it to be. It can also include whatever locations the organization wants it to include as well. Another output is the actual certificate itself. Every registrar has something similar to this, some sort of certificate that's signed by the company and states when it was issued. It also includes the scope, the facilities, like all of the information that you just saw on the web page. So, misconceptions, which is also a way of coming back to kind of reiterate the key points for ISO 27001. It was always this thing that was unattainable. It's this unattainable goal, and that's just not the case anymore. We're seeing more and more organizations go down this path, organizations of all sizes. You don't need to be a Fortune 1000 company with unlimited resources. Small companies can go through this as well. Again, the focus is of what they're able to provide. Scope does not have to be the entire organization. It does not have to be the whole company. And as I mentioned before, you don't have to meet all of the 133 controls defined in Appendix A. I mentioned the exceptions, the other couple points I'd make. Full recertification occurs annually. That's not correct. The way certification works is that a certification is valid for 3 years, and in the off years there are what are called surveillance audits. It's not a full-blown certification assessment like you go through in year one, but it's the ISO lead auditor does come on site, does some inspection of your processes as well as your controls, just to make sure that the program is operating as it's intended to. So think of it more as in terms of your doctor's visit or checkup, as opposed to the extensive exam that occurs every 3 years. The last piece, ISO 27002 is a best practice ISO standard. Those of you who are scholars of ISO standards know that there are standards that you can certify against, and there are standards that prescribe best practice or standards of good practice. ISO 27002 is the latter. ISO 27002 starts with Appendix A, the 133 controls that are listed, and it breaks out into recommended or considered types of approaches for for implementing those controls. So it's important to note that you can't be ISO 27002 certified. There have been companies that have claimed it. Excuse me. And you can build programs around the controls and around the standards, but 27001 is the security certification that you actually get certified against. Okay, just a couple more slides here, and then we'll leave a few minutes for questions. Just laying these different types of, and I consider this the current, what we just covered in terms of SSA 16 and ISO certification, PCI. These are the current state of the different types of audits and certifications that are most popular right now. They're the ones that the service providers are being, pushed to go through. Where we're seeing the trends, SAS 70 is probably the most common that you will see out there. Again, because if hosting providers, data centers, ASPs, that do business with companies that may host or house some sort of financial data related to their financial position within these companies. It's a very common audit that you see out there. In terms of trends, I think what you're going to see over the course of the next couple of years, as more awareness occurs with the SOC reports, and there's more awareness that an SSA 16 should not be performed if the company is providing a service that doesn't impact financial transactions. So you may see some shifting between SOC 1, SOC 2 reports, again, depending upon the type of service that the organization is requiring. ISO certification is definitely on the rise. It's been most popular over the last decade or so in Asia and in parts of Europe. Fastest growth right now is in Europe and in the U.S. Asia, for a long period of time, India, Japan, for instance, it was very popular. Mandated in certain instances. There was a point in time, I want to say it was 3 years ago, where Japan had approximately 40% of all of the ISO 27001 certificates that were issued. So definitely something that is much more culturally ingrained in in Asia and also in Europe. It's continuing to grow in Europe, and it's growing obviously in the U.S. and North America as well. And I expect that the announcements like from Amazon and Microsoft and so forth, all of which occurred in the second half of last year, are going to continue momentum as more providers want to use that for differentiation. Again, PCI is there as well. What I've tried to do in this slide is lay out the different types, whether or not they're prescriptive or whether or not they're more flexible in nature. But again, PCI has gotten a heavy set of adoption, in large because it's not optional for providers that handle credit card data, or providers whose customers handle credit card data. So it's an important thing to note as well. The one thing worth mentioning is, what you're not seeing here is an Uber standard where all of these come together. And I wanted to talk briefly about compliance. So generally speaking, having one of these audits or certifications done does not make you compliant with a specific regulation. And I'm talking about things like HIPAA or FSMA. And specifically in the U.S., these are regulations that healthcare providers or government agencies respectively have to comply with. There's standards for their information security program. If you're not a healthcare provider or a government agency, intrinsically you're just a service provider alone is not specifically HIPAA compliant or FSMA compliant. What most providers, or what a lot of providers will do, is they will align their controls with the requirements of these regulations. They'll produce these audit and certification reports in support of making the case to their customers, who are healthcare providers or government agencies or so forth. So basically, your controls are your controls, and they can be sliced and diced and reorganized and presented back to a customer or to a customer's auditor, in the format of something that can help meet those compliance requirements. But I'd caution against any non-healthcare company claiming that they're HIPAA certified or a provider talking about FSMA. There's been some debates in the security blogs and so forth about some postings, about that. But again, these are regulations that different, at least currently, different types of organizations are required to meet. And as a service provider, you've got to be able to support them, to play a part in that role. But ultimately, it's the client who is on the key hook for that compliance. Again, all of this stuff helps. The one thing that you don't see, as I mentioned briefly, is you don't see some sort of an Uber standard for cloud security or cloud controls that spans across this. And frankly, I don't think that there's going to be one. The Cloud Security Alliance has actually created a very helpful matrix that crosswalks all of these different requirements. It starts with some base control objectives, but it maps things like HIPAA to ISO and NIST, which is in support of FSMA, and so forth as well. The key points that I'd make here is that this is where we see most of the trends. We don't see, there will be other standards that are created, that are suggested, that are presented, and so forth, but I tend to see that at the end of the day, a customer is going to want to see information, sliced and diced the way they want to see that information. They're going to want to see a specific subset of the information that's relevant to them. So even another standard wouldn't necessarily give them the confidence that they're looking at the information that's specific to them, that's relevant to their concerns. So where I think the value is going to lie in is the ability, not in the ability to create some Uber standard, but in the ability to create to be able to cross-reference and jump back and forth between the different standards, taking a common set of controls that you've applied and being able to say, well, this is how it relates to HIPAA. This is how what I do relates to ISO 27001. Here's how it relates to NIST and so forth. And so the Cloud Security Alliance, which I'm a member of, they've produced this cloud controls matrix that does a good job in crosswalking a lot of the common standards, a lot of the common controls. Moving on from that, and going back to my analogy, it's kind of some closing thoughts, but going back to my analogy, before it was you needed to have stainless steel appliances in the kitchen. Nowadays, the buyer wants to know what make and model and how energy efficient is your refrigerator, right? It's that level of detail that we get to, and I think it's that level of detail that'll ultimately preclude some overarching Uber cloud security standard from controlling the universe, so to speak. The reality is that the consumers of this information, they want specific information. They want to know specifics. They don't want to just know that you're compliant, certified, et cetera. They want to know at a greater degree of granularity what's occurring, what's relevant to them. They want access to the specific questions that they have. On the same side, providers are constantly getting over-audited. Unfortunately, the complexity and the different types of audits, creates a lot of work for the industry that I'm in. And the fact that there are different audits for FSMA and different audits for Sarbanes-Oxley and so forth, it obviously creates a lot of work for auditors. But at the same time, the providers are consistently saying that they're over-audited, that it's a common set of controls that gets looked at in some fashion, right? It's everyone's coming and looking at different things, but they're all sampling and they're all looking from a known universe of controls. So they want more efficient auditing. Consumers want better access to information. And so this is the path that we see things going. And one example is cloudaudit.org, which is part of the Cloud Security Alliance, is an initiative that's working to create APIs and technology types of standards to, and when I say standards, I'm not talking about the standards on what to do or the controls. I'm talking about standards on how technology or users can gather the information about an organization's controls. And so the goal with Cloud Audit is to provide a means to share that information, to communicate that information, to integrate it with technology tools such as GRC and so forth. So it's building on the notion that people want more specifics, that people want to know more and specifically what's relevant to them about the cloud providers that they're working with. So I'm pretty excited to be working with Cloud Audit. It's pretty early on, obviously, and there's a lot of groundwork being done now. But it really is it's not about creating another security standard or a set of standards. It's about organizing the information and getting that next layer down that people are allowed to make their decisions by. So with that, I'll wrap up. We've got a few moments for questions if you want to type in on the Q&A. No, we're almost at 9 o'clock West Coast time, which is noon and lunchtime for those of you on the East Coast. But I'll just briefly open up if anyone's got any quick questions. Okay. So, well, hearing none, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. There's my email. There's our website. You can find any of us pretty easily there. Again, I want to thank everybody who came out and listened in today. I hope it was worthwhile. I hope you got some use out of it. And thank you, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Take care.